Hey everybody, welcome to our second lesson of this of ELA, and today we're going to be going over character motivation and embedding evidence. So let's get right to it. So the objective for today is that students will be able to analyze character motivation in the fiction short story Button Button and embed evidence into responses by identifying the main character's thoughts, feelings, and actions and questioning why they think, feel, and act that way. So what this is going to do, this is going to help us determine the character's motivation and, like what it says, why exactly they think, feel, and act the way that they do. This is going to help us progress during the rest of the story. So first, let's do a quick recap. What I want you guys to do is to pause this video and answer this question in the Google form. What happened in part 1 of Button Button? Also, make sure to answer this question in 2 complete sentences. What this is going to do, this is going to help you, remember what exactly happened during the story, and that way you can move along without having any sort of inconsistencies. So up to this point, I'm going to assume that you've already answered the question, so let's dive right into the reading. But before we do, as you read along with me, be sure to pay attention to the clues I find to identify the thoughts, the feelings, and actions of the characters. Number 2, the questions I ask myself about why the characters are thinking, feeling, and doing certain things. So, let's get right to it. In the morning, as she left the apartment, Norma saw the card halves on the table. Impulsively, she dropped them into her purse. She locked the front door and joined Arthur in the elevator. While she was on her coffee break, she took the card halves from her purse and held the torn edges together. Only Mr. Stewart's voice, name, and telephone number were printed on the card. After lunch, she took the card halves from her purse again and scotch-taped the edges together. Why am I doing this? She thought. Just before 5, she dialed the number. Good afternoon, said Mr. Stewart's voice. Norma almost hung up, but restrained herself. She cleared her throat. This is Miss Lewis, she said. Yes, Mrs. Lewis. Mr. Stewart sounded pleased. I'm curious. That's natural, Mr. Stewart said. Not that I believe a word of what you told us. Oh, it's quite authentic, Mr. Stewart answered. Well, whatever. Norma swallowed. When you said someone in the world would die, what did you mean? Exactly that, he answered. It could be anyone. All we guarantee is that you don't know them, and of course that you wouldn't have to watch them die. For $50,000, Norma said. That is correct. She made a scoffing sound. Pfft, that's crazy. Nonetheless, that is the proposition, Mr. Stewart said. Would you like me to return the button unit? Norma stiffened. Certainly not. She hung up angrily. So now that we've read through the text, some questions we want to ask ourselves are, what are the characters thinking, feeling, and doing? Number 2, why are they thinking, feeling, and doing that? And number 3, big picture question, is it good or is it bad? Now this is something we want to keep in the back of our minds, but we can't really answer this question just yet, just because we haven't progressed enough in the story to really answer that question. So let's look for some answers. So what I've done here, as you can see, I put green dots where I believe there's to be helpful clues when answering our questions. So the first one is, after lunch, she took the card halves from her purse again and scotch-taped the edges together. Why am I doing this? She thought. Just before 5, she dialed the number. Good afternoon, said Mr. Stewart's voice. So we know she hasn't said anything about her feelings, but from what we see, she physically scotch tapes the edges of the card back together and she proceeds to dial the number. So we know that there might be at least a little bit of interest in the button. So our second clue is, I'm curious. So now we know that she's genuinely curious about what the button does and whether or not it will actually give you $50,000 if anyone in the world dies without you seeing it. So next what we're going to do is we're going to write our statement just like we did in our last class. And in order to do this, what we want to do is write our claim what we think that the main character is thinking, doing, and feeling. And also, we want to have actual evidence, which is what the text says that proves what I think. Now, unlike in our last class when we were paraphrasing, we're actually going to take direct quotes from the passage and we're going to put it into our statement. So, some grammar rules for text evidence is first having our citation. For example, on page 16, it says this and this and that. And number 2, the opening punctuation, the comma, the quote, and the capital. And number 3, our closing punctuation, inside end punctuation, and end quote. Now, these two rules might seem a little confusing at first, but it'll make a lot more sense once we actually write our statement. Okay, so now we're actually going to start writing our statement. So we're going to answer the question, why does Norma call Mr. Stewart? So, of course, what we want, just like in our last slide, is we want our claim, what we think. So what I got is that Norma calls Mr. Stewart because she can't stop thinking about the proposal. And next, of course, we want to do our citation. On page blank, it says this. And what I got is on page 1, Norma says, I'm curious. So now that we've gotten our statement down, we can ask, does it have the claim and does it have evidence? So our claim, of course, is Norma calls Mr. Stewart because she can't stop thinking about the proposal. Her action, what she's doing, is that she calls Mr. Stewart. She's thinking about the proposal. And the text evidence, of course, with our citation, our opening punctuation, and our closing punctuation, is I'm curious, which is basically what she is currently feeling. So basically, we can do all this in just 2 sentences, guys. But anyways, good luck on the rest of this lesson. I know you're all going to do great. And I will see you tomorrow in class.